Good evening, Mr. Perfects. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for being patient. A couple of minutes late, but better late than never. Welcome to TRH, the Reconnection Hour by Mr. Perfect. I'm Terry, founder and CEO of Mr. Perfect, as you probably well know by now. What is Mr. Perfect? Well, we bring together men at barbecues across Australia to create communities and connection for the betterment of their mental health and to reduce isolation. We're obviously not doing that right now, but we've got some news later that we might be able to kick them off again, which is incredible. We have been doing some online barbecues and a lot more online stuff as well, which has been very cool. What's TRH? Well, Reconnection Hour, we a bit of a mixed bag of chatting to health professionals, mental health professionals, our own barbecue hosts, and other people in, I guess, what I call the community and connections sector, doing great things in mental health, men's health, connection, you name it. We get some great people on. This is the first time I mentioned it last week, was a little disclaimer, just to say, look, we are going to discuss things in and around mental health. It won't get too gory, but just a bit of a pre-warning, I guess, if anything that might trigger or not. Hopefully it won't, but just a warning that we will discuss that. Update on the week that has been for Mr. Perfect. I alluded to it last week, but I think I announced on our socials, the Zurich Foundation, we won sort of a sizable amount of money from them, at least for us, which is absolutely incredible. It's been really great to see that just one little conversation that I had at a corporate barbecue once has led to that. So it's really, relieved us for the rest of the year, which is amazing. We've got our first barbecue back this week. We've got a few restrictions around it, but it'll be in Perth. On Sunday, you'll be able to see the details on the event page. The rest of the barbecues we're looking to kick off in June and July. Again, there's going to be some restrictions around it and just being sensible and careful and following all the guidelines, but you'll be able to find the details on the Facebook events page. Just a general thank you to our community while we've been during these COVID times. You guys have been incredible. Lots of chatter and optimistic and positive things going on in the group, and where people have needed a little bit of support, there's just been plenty of you jumping on and helping as well, which is just amazing. Couldn't wish for anything more. A reminder, best question or comment for tonight. This is something I'm adding tonight. You can win a Mr. Perfect t-shirt. I've got a few more to get rid of. And any of the larger lads in the audience, I still have some 3x XLs and 4x XLs that I'm going to give away free. So just DM or comment or do whatever you need to do. Message me directly. I'll send you one. So look, I guess leading on to that, someone that's been part of our community and it kind of embodies a lot of what we do, and I feel a lot of affinity to as well. I don't know him too well personally, but I do know of him, have spoken to him, have met him, and we've had some great chats and I guess great interactions, and hopefully more to come after this. Tonight we're going to chat to Dr. Tim Sharp, aka Dr. Happy. So I'll give a quick intro and then I'll bring him in. He's the Chief Happiness Officer of the Happiness Institute, which is Australia's first and now largest organisation devoted solely to enhancing happiness individuals, families and organisations. He's heavily involved in the youth mental health charity Batir, which a lot of you know, incredible group. He's a creator and author of the audiobook Habits for Happiness, which has been huge. I've seen some of the stats on it and the updates. Has been a bestseller. He's a clinical psychologist, public speaker and author. I know I'll find out a bit more about his psychology background, but I know he did or does a lot in organizational psychology. Husband, father, and a big friend and support of Mr. Perfect. He's about 4 or 5 years ago, he gave me, before I even started Mr. Perfect, I just messaged him and said, have you got time to have a coffee? And, most people would say no. And Tim and I had a great chat. So it was actually a good, also another reason why we started Mr. Perfect. That chat gave me a bit of hope as well. So it's amazing. Finally, he's one of the most relatable humans in the world I think I've encountered, and talks candidly about the good and the challenging times as well. So I will bring in Dr. Tim Sharp. Hello.
Hey there, how are you?
Yeah, very well. How are you going?
Pretty good under the circumstances, yeah.
Excellent. And you're kind of working at the moment remotely, I guess. You said you're doing a bit of writing.
Yeah, well, bits and pieces. So a lot of my work is speaking at organisations and at conferences, and that's as you can probably understand, completely disappeared. About 6 weeks ago, everything got cancelled, and it'll probably be cancelled for another few months. A bit of that has gone online. I've done a few Zoom presentations, but luckily enough, as you said, just before all this happened, I'd signed a new book contract. So for the first month or so of isolation, I was pretty happily and busily writing, which was good. And it certainly sort of kept me busy and semi-sane as well for the last few weeks.
Yeah. I love that, and I don't know, that's why I feel a bit more of affinity to you as well, as not quite as an accomplished writer as you, but having to write a book during this time wouldn't be too bad of a thing, I can imagine. I reckon I could lose myself in that a little bit. But with the public speaking, I was going to ask just a question I thought of then. Doing it over Zoom, how do you feel it's connected to the audience? Has it been worse, the same, better, or have you felt the general vibe of it?
Look, it's a lot more convenient, I suppose. Yeah. But no, it's not. I'd say it's not as good. And I mean, in the sense that, if given the name of what we're doing, the connection hour, it's a lot harder to connect. Well, it's very hard to connect with the audience. So it's a bit of a challenge, to be honest, to deliver like a keynote for 45, 60 minutes. When you literally just, like I am now, staring at a screen. So it's not ideal, but at the same time, I'm grateful for the technology that I can still do and that I can still offer the support and advice that I can offer to some people who need it. So like there's pros and cons, there's good and bad, but certainly it is very difficult to get that connection that you would normally get with a live audience.
Yeah, definitely. I was listening to a podcast yesterday, not quite the same industry, but a guy who's a angel investor for sort of small startup companies in the US, and he was saying that over Zoom, like he'd be normally in meetings all day, face to face. He's he's extroverted, but he likes to connect with people and see the subtleties of the body language and the eye movements, and he said he's finding this probably even more exhausting, because you said sitting there for 45, 60 minutes in front of the camera where there's no room to maneuver around or stand up or walk around and express yourself in a way that's, I don't know, that could help you right at that point or release some sort of tension or energy. And he said he's finding it really, really big struggle to get across that, that connection. So no, it's interesting you said that. So I had alluded to a few things that you've done. I'm sure there's many more in my intro, but first question, I would love to know a little bit more about you rather than sort of the organizations you're involved in, which we'll move on to, and the things you're involved in. But tell us a bit about your story, background, childhood, whatever you feel comfortable with, and how you got to, I guess, psychology in the world you're in now.
Stories, yeah. Is this PG rated or? Yeah. I guess. I'll kind of tell it in two parts. So my professional story, I suppose, is I did study psychology after school, although not because I wanted to be a psychologist. To be honest, I'd never met a psychologist at that stage. And to be honest, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do when I left school. Psychology sort of vaguely interested me, but I didn't really know what it was about. And for the first few years, I didn't really enjoy it that much, to be honest. I was a pretty lost soul, to be honest. I was pretty unsettled. So I did first year, didn't really get into it that much. Took a year off, did the whole backpacking around Europe thing, which is fantastic, great experience. Came back, did second year, was still pretty unsettled. Took another year off, and this time went around Australia. Came back and did third year, and started to settle down a bit more, maybe because of age and maybe because I think maybe psychology was starting to get a bit more interesting. But even after I finished my third and then my fourth year, my honours year, I still didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. I still hadn't even really thought about being a psychologist at that stage. But then I had one of those, I've been lucky enough in my life to have a couple of really sort of significant moments, I suppose, light bulb moments. And for somehow or other, I still don't quite understand how, I had a conversation with one of the tutors or the lecturers at university, and she encouraged me to apply for the clinical master's degree, which I hadn't even thought of then. And I think there was only like a couple of days left for the applications. So again, at this stage, I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. I still didn't really know what a psychologist did. But luckily enough, I applied, got accepted, came back the next year to do my clinical master's degree. And that was fantastic. It was one of the best decisions I've ever made. It was the first time in my life, so I would have been, sort of mid-20s, I suppose, or early to mid-20s. But it's the first time in my life I actually thought I knew what I wanted to do. So that then led to a couple of really great years of studying, then some work, then working as a clinician, which I loved. It was fantastic. It was a lot of hard work. And then I did my PhD, thinking I wanted to become an academic. But that was all really very, very satisfying and fulfilling part of my life. And I said, particularly because after being lost for so long, I'd kind of found what I thought at that stage was my career, my calling. So I continued that for a long time. Cut a long story short, left the public system. I was working at Royal North Shore Hospital, which is one of the big teaching hospitals here in Sydney. But I was also becoming an academic at Sydney University. And this was all going great. But then for a couple of reasons, I left there to go into private practice. And this was kind of like the second stage of my professional life, because I discovered a bit of an entrepreneurial gene I didn't know I had, and ended up building a very successful and quite large business, a multi-million-dollar business, which is a bit of a surprise to everyone because I'd never thought of myself as an entrepreneur or businessman. So that continued. So that was another sort of the next stage. And then again, to cut a long story short, I discovered positive psychology, and then set up the Happiness Institute, which is another relatively successful venture, and that's really what I've dedicated sort of the last couple of decades, I suppose, to promoting the principles of positive psychology. So in my professional life, I've been a clinical psychologist, a researcher, an academic, a coach, and a consultant, but then more recently, I suppose, a speaker and writer and a lot of media work, and more recently a lot more podcasting and those sorts of things. So that's my professional life, and I suppose lately, the last few years, it's mostly been speaking to organizations, speaking at conferences, writing, as I said. And as you hinted at earlier, particularly for the last 6 or 7 years, I've given a lot of my time to a youth mental health charity called Batyr, who do a fantastic job of smashing the stigma associated with mental health, particularly with high schools and universities. So that's kind of a brief version. At the same time, running parallel to that in my personal life, despite being a clinical psychologist and despite being known as Dr. Happy, I've also experienced quite severe depression for pretty much all of my adult life, with unfortunately quite a number of severe suicidal episodes. It's something that I didn't speak about for a long time because no one did at that stage. I still look back in horror almost at the first. I don't want to go into the details, but the first time I had to take my life, I was admitted to hospital, and then I was discharged from hospital with nothing, with no referral, no advice, no resources. Now, admittedly, and I don't really blame anyone because this was before. I'm very old, as you can see, and this is, this was before Mr. Perfect. This was before Beyond Blue. This was before Are You OK Day. A lot of these fantastic things that have happened in the last, I guess, decade or so, they just didn't exist then. So again, I don't blame anyone, but you look back, and it wasn't that long ago. Just no one spoke about it. My parents, who loved me and tried to do the best they could, had no idea at all, and there was no support for them. That we just didn't even have the vocabulary to talk about these sorts of things. So, and so that's why I'm so passionate about Batyr. That's why I love what you're doing here, Terry. And it's fantastic now that I, for myself, but also as a father of 2 teenagers and a teenage son particularly, to think that he's growing up in a world where hopefully these sorts of conversations can be much more normalized and in fact can be more positive. And obviously that's a big thing what Batyr does, but this is why I love, the Mr. Perfect barbecues, to give people a safe place to have conversations that should be okay. We should be able to talk about this sort of thing. So that's the personal part of life, which I've spoken a lot more about in the last 5 or 6 years, I suppose.
And with I'm just curious as to when, because I think about the point that there was a number of things that happened for me to go, okay, no one else around me is ready to kind of deal with this or knew how to deal with it. So I'm going to have to do it myself. And then there was a number of events that happened. That there wasn't just sort of one light bulb or one thing that made me go and get help. It was a number of things. And eventually I got there. And then I realized, look, this thing doesn't just go away. Like I accept it. And it's now a case of management and dealing with it in the best appropriate way. Did you have one of those moments? Did it get to the crisis point and then you go, oh, well, now I definitely need to go and do something about it? And did you do it on your own, or did you feel completely disconnected from everything? How did that work?
No, look, it was bits and pieces and splitter and splatter and missteps and mistakes.
Yeah.
And, as I said, I hadn't. Well, I don't even think I knew what I was experiencing in the early days, in my early 20s, and unfortunately, like a lot of people, and particularly a lot of blokes, my therapy, my coping was alcohol.
Yes.
And that's how I coped with my depression. And the strange thing is, it kind of works a little bit, and that's the bad part. But it sort of does help, well, in the short term anyway. It doesn't help in the long term. And the other part is that it's so normalized. It's such a part of our society that I wasn't any different to any of my mates. I mean, we just drank a lot. That's what young blokes did. And it's in as much as I still like a drink now, it's we've got a very serious problem in this country with alcohol. That's another discussion, I suppose. Of course. But so certainly in my late teens, or my teens and early teens, I didn't do very good by myself by using alcohol, and I admit other drugs to try to cope. That was all I knew at that stage. So it really wasn't until I made that first attempt to take my life, when I was admitted to hospital, that my parents sort of realized, I guess, how serious it was. So we tried to, they tried to help me get some help. And I think I wanted to get help. Again, I just didn't know what to do or where to go at that stage. And then, unfortunately, the first couple of people weren't very helpful. We had a couple of, and this is actually something I think is important to talk about, because it doesn't get talked about that much, that it's not always that first psychologist or psychiatrist or counselor or whatever that necessarily helps. So, but luckily we sort of persisted. And I think it was like the third clinical psychologist who I found that just clicked. I felt comfortable with her. Her approach suited me. So it's not always that they're good or bad. It's sometimes just that the approach doesn't fit, or the chemistry is not there. But thankfully, I was incredibly lucky. She was fantastic, and that literally changed my life. So she helped me a lot at that stage. But then I've had many ups and downs since then, and I've had to re-find other people. And it took me a long time. I now have another psychologist that I see regularly. And it took me a while to find her, again, someone that fitted with my life now. I mean, I'm very different now to how I was then, but it didn't just happen overnight. It took a lot of mistakes and missteps, as I said, and it took a bit of trial and error, really, to find that right person, to find the right approach, and maybe for me to be ready as well, I suppose, or me to be mature enough, or whatever. I don't know how to describe it, but it did take a long while. And then even then, again, this is going back quite a few years, I didn't talk about it at all. In fact, when I came out, I sort of half joke about coming out of the closet. I don't mean the same. Exactly the same. In an offensive way. It's just a way of describing that I did hide it for a long time. And when I came out sort of a bit more formally, again, probably quite a few years ago now, and one of the first things I did was write a letter or an email to my really close group of friends. And my immediate family knew, obviously, but the people that many of my old school friends, some of my longest friends, the people that I considered my sort of closest, and I wrote them a letter. And I must admit, I just assumed that they would have known. I assumed they would have guessed. I mean, some of them had been around me when I'd been admitted to hospital. I mean, and that had happened again another time. And so, but what was amazing is that when I wrote this letter, almost all of them were sort of flabbergasted. They were totally surprised. They said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I kind of thought, well, how didn't you? Why didn't you know? Like, how the hell couldn't you have seen that I was so fucked up? Excuse me. Yeah. Because that's how I felt. I felt so fucked up for so many years. I felt it must have been so obvious to everyone. But I guess what I learned there is how good I was and how good many of us are at covering this up, at hiding it and putting on a brave face. So, you know, that was a real eye-opener for me, that what I thought had been so obvious for so long obviously hadn't been. So that even my best friends hadn't noticed or yeah. So you know, and then from there I started talking more and more publicly, and as you said, through the work I do with Batir now, it's actually become a big part of my life now, trying to smash that stigma, trying to normalize these conversations. You know, I couldn't help but look over in the comments, and I saw someone said it's very, very brave of me for sharing, but yeah, I don't consider myself brave at all. I consider it shouldn't take bravery or courage to talk about it. Just like, you know, I'm not ashamed that I have to wear glasses. I'm not ashamed that I had to have my appendix out. I'm not ashamed of you know, having other health problems. I've had you know, broken my thumb once, and so why should I be ashamed that I've got a you know, mental health problem?
I was just about to put that on the screen after you finished. I was so sort of lost in what you were saying, but yeah, there's a couple of things there. The bravery part of being, you know, Mr. Perfect, and thinking someone must know, or like someone must have seen these points. And I used to think the same. I used to think, well, I'd let it go under, you know, it'd simmer under the surface, and then I'd go out on a big night out, for example, and something would happen, and then, you know, emotionally lose it the next day. And I just thought, well, surely they saw that. Someone's going to say, come on, let's get your evidence. And it never happened. Never. I don't think it ever happened, actually. Even people I was, you know, dating or whatever it might have been, family, whatever. It may have been alluded to, but then it was very quickly like, we have no idea how to deal with it, so we're not comfortable dealing with it. And I understand that. I did the same thing at uni with a girl I was seeing who was severely depressed and broke down in front of me. And I somehow moved my own, at the time, knowing I was depressed or thinking I was, moved myself out of that equation and thought, why is she? I don't know how I did that at that point. I knew I was depressed. She was, you know, in a real tight spot, really serious spot, but I still didn't know how to deal with that. It was amazing, and I couldn't deal with it. It was just really incredible to think that we can go that long hiding it, or think we're hiding it, or putting on a brave face. And you know, power to you for eventually sort of facing it, or facing it as good as you could have. But I wanted to go back to something you said about or you were saying about your sort of connection to a psychologist, or finding. We've been talking about this almost on every live stream. It's probably the biggest question I get at the moment from people through the Mr. Perfect group, or people I know, or friends, or whoever it might be. Oh, but I can't find a good psychologist, or I can't find it. And I say, I used to sort of try and give some sort of advice around it. And now it's kind of, if you're thinking that good is subjective, firstly. So what you think is good might not be good for me or you, and secondly, you got to work hard at it. Like, you're going to have to probably go to a couple, likely, before you even get any form of connection with them. And I don't know if people are educated on that beforehand. I think that's a problem maybe with men as well. They're not told that, look, this is going to be really hard to get this help, because they've normally stumbled upon it, or they've been dragged there by someone, or suggested they go to someone. So I guess it's important to know, and I guess your points on it, what would your sort of suggestions be for someone then, if they're finding they're not connecting with their psychologist? What would be your sort of high level points that they should be doing?
Well, I think you've already touched on it.
Well, yeah, probably. Sorry.
You know, I guess one of the ways that I often describe it, without, and again, it might sound a bit weird in a way, but I think it's a reasonable metaphor, is it's a bit like dating. You know, not all of us marry the first person that we go out with. So it's a little bit like that. I mean, if you do meet a good psychologist and it just clicks straight away, fantastic. But as we said, it doesn't always work like that. Just like, you know, my wife wasn't the first girl I ever dated. And so, you know, I think that you need to, well, it's a bit of a balance, because as you said, you've got to give them at least a reasonable go. Like, it won't necessarily just happen in the first session. It does take time to build that rapport. It does take time for them and you to get used to the approach. So I would say, if you go along to a psychologist, and I say psychologist, but other, you know, mental health professional, but you go along to psychologist, I would say give it at least a couple of sessions, because it can take a while for both of us to feel our way and to get used to it and to try a few things out. And really the first session is going to be predominantly them just asking you a whole bunch of questions. They need to do that. And because I've sat on both sides of the table, if I'm the psychologist, the first step, all I'm doing is just asking you a bunch of questions, getting to know. I'm not really going to be able to help you that much in the first session. So I would say give it at least a bit of a try, give it at least 2 or 3, if not even 4 or 5 sessions just to see. But what I would also say is don't go on forever. If it's it's not working, you should know within, I would say within 3 or 4 sessions, not that you'll be cured, not that everything will be magically better, but you should feel, again, that there's a connection there. That's probably the most important thing in the early stages. And after the first 3, 4, maybe 5, you should at least feel that what this person's saying is making sense, and that, yes, I think this is going to help me. You might not be all the way there, you won't have done everything, but if you don't feel that if you don't feel the connection, if it's not making sense, if you don't feel any sort of hope or optimism, then I'd say find someone else to date, try someone else. Hopefully, most people I've spoken to, and in my experience, that maybe it'll take 2 or 3, but you will find there are really good people out there. There's a lot of great professionals out there, and hopefully it won't take too long, but it might take a couple of hours.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a similar sort of conversation I've been having with people recently. I'm trying not to sort of tell them what to do, but in essentially saying ability, and you'll probably notice pretty quickly fairly quickly with someone, if they might suggest to you they're not right for you. And I've had a psychologist tell me that as well.
Sorry, the other thing these days, which is different to when I first started out professionally, is that almost every mental health professional these days will almost certainly have a website, and they'll possibly even have sort of some social media profiles. So that you can actually get to know them a little bit and get a bit of a feel for their style, just by looking at their website, maybe looking at their Facebook or Instagram feed. And as you said earlier, and I think it's important, it's not necessarily that one approach is right or wrong or better or worse. There are some that are not very good, I'd steer away from, but as long as they're reasonably qualified and they've got, they're registered, etc., you can get a bit of a feel for their I suppose their personality, in a sense, their professional personality, and that'll give you a bit of an idea about whether there might be a fit there. So it won't be perfect, but it'll give you a bit of an idea.
And I don't know if people are reading my mind tonight, but John has just commented here. He's a member of our community, comes on the online barbecues a lot. Great guy, gets everyone talking, and he's very open to us and says, I'm very lucky not to have any mental challenges or things that I think that are right now anyway, that he's quite open about. He said, but I'm really interested in, talking to you guys and he asked me everyone a lot of questions, and he's been great about it. And just as I was about to ask this question, he's popped up with this. So he said, what do you do if you feel you're not getting to a person, but they need help? So I think he's saying maybe a friend of his or someone he knows that's in trouble, and he wants them to get help. I think that's what I was going to ask as well, probably along those lines. Is there any sort of suggestions how you can do that for someone, or you can't, or what do you think?
Well, yeah, you can. So I guess that's, there's that old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, sort of thing. So, but so that's partly true. You can't really force someone in therapy, or, you possibly can, but it's not a great idea. It's not a good starting point. So, but what you can do is nudge them and encourage them and give them information. So what I would say is, so we talked about this a bit earlier when it comes to finding the right therapist. It depends a lot on the person and their personality and their style. That also comes into play in terms of how you approach them and how do you try to nudge them in the right direction. So what I would say is that the goal, I suppose, is if you really think someone needs some help, is to try to get them to realize that they need help. And there are various ways of doing that. So you can provide them with, with information. So if you go to your local GP these days, you'll probably find a whole wall or shelf full of pamphlets. And there's brochures for Black Dog and Beyond Blue and OK, etc. So you can get some of those things, hand them over. Or depending on their style or their age or whatever, you can direct them to certain websites. And there's some fantastic resources now. And this is a fantastic, I mean, we take this for granted now, but this, some of it existed when I started out, but not at the level that it is now. And one of the things I actually love, I think there's a lot to love about it, because it's much easier for someone to go to visit a website. It's anonymous, there's no stigma really. And there's a lot of great information. So that's another thing you can do, is direct them towards, as I said, the Are You OK Day website, the Mr. Perfect website, or whatever you think will be appropriate, either to help, to give them some information or help them see a conversation. You can send them a self-help book. You can encourage them to listen to a podcast, or whatever you think might work for them. There's all sorts of ways that you can just gently, or maybe not gently, sometimes just being blunt and honest, but to try to get them to think about, is this, are you really okay? Could things be better? And if they're not, then, and then, there's all sorts of, if it is about the stigma, there's all sorts of metaphors you can use that, if your car was spluttering along, you'd take it to the mechanic, presumably, or if your tooth was aching, you'd go to the dentist, or if you're, coming up to June 30 and you're having some troubles with your finances, you might go to an accountant. Well, going to a psychologist is no different, really. They're an expert, just like a lawyer or accountant or mechanic are experts, and they might be able to help you live a better life.
Absolutely.
So the answer is to try to find a way that you think might work for that particular person, to help them recognize there's a problem, realize there might be something they can do about it, and then find the right person for them.
Definitely. And I think you're right. That's a good point. It's got to be customized. You can't just expect, everyone to feel, oh, here's a leaflet, or here's it for everyone. It's just not going to be, the right thing. And I think tailoring it to knowing that person really well is important. But there's a couple of things you said. I remember I was sort of been 15 years ago when I knew way before there was, something different about me, I guess I could say, but I've talked about it before, I Googled depression and what's depression. That's probably 21, I think. It's one of the sort of darker periods. And there wasn't too much around, like in the UK on websites and things, and maybe there was like the National Mental Health something. There was maybe one big charity that did something, and it had a checklist, and there was 8 things, and I had 6 of them, and I went, oh, I haven't got it then, because I didn't match the whole 8. And like I completely put the laptop down, cut that out of my head for a while, That was back then. You wouldn't even say, that was 15 years ago. The terrifying thought that you would even address that was a big thing. So clearly now we have a ton of resources around. I was going to ask you, and I don't know if you have a view on it, but I now know from my and I know you're definitely great at research as well, but you would know hundreds from community grassroots groups, movements, etc., right through to more the clinical things, right through to websites, apps, you name it, whatever it works for people. There's so many around right now. But do you think it's a problem of sort of access? Or I've had people comment to me, when I did a landscape of sort of the mental health sector of these groups, and everyone was really positive about it. So it's good to know there's lots around. But then there was a couple who said, isn't this confusing, or isn't this, they were surprised that it was so vast. And I said, yeah, like there's actually a lot there if you look. Maybe it's a marketing problem or communicating to people what they exactly need, or an education problem. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, look, I guess there's pros and cons. There's different ways to answer that. I mean, the good thing is, those things didn't even exist 10, 30 years ago. So it's fantastic that there are a lot of resources available, so many more that were available when I first started suffering, or even if I go, but if I think about my father or grandfather's generation, there was virtually nothing. So I think it's important to recognize we've come a long way. It's fantastic that there are a lot of those things out there. As you said, it can be a bit confusing, although many of those things, they're working in different areas and they're offering different services. So they're not necessarily, they don't necessarily all overlap. And that's a good thing that there is, because there's, mental health is a very complex area. There's everything from, there's sort of prevention, there's education, there's research, and then there's clinical services, there's inpatient services, outpatient. So there's, different people will require different pieces of that puzzle, I suppose. there could be better collaboration. I think those of us that work in the in the health area all acknowledge that, and I'm hopeful that we're starting to see a bit more than that. I really feel in the last 12 to 18 months that we're starting to see a bit more of that, although it does frustrate me sometimes that particularly with some of the bigger players, I won't mention any names, but particularly some of the big players, as there always is, there's politics and there's competition. Some competing for grants and for funds, and that is a bit of it is a bit frustrating, but that's life, I guess. That's it's no different to any other area, really. But I do have, I must admit, if you'd asked me, compared to how I would have felt maybe 2-3 years ago, I do actually have some hope now that there is a more of a coming together, a bit more of a collaboration, and maybe that's just a sign of maturity of the whole area becoming more mature and recognizing. But for the average person out there, I guess if they're looking for help, I just start wherever you can, try whatever's easiest to access or whatever kind of makes most sense for you. And even if that's not the right thing, they'll probably be able to put you in touch with the right thing. So just get in there and get started with something, and that's probably better than nothing.
Exactly. And I think you're right. I've seen it more over the last year, maybe just on the grassroots sort of level, and similar to the things we do. A lot more people reach out now and say, hey, this is what we're doing. We feel like we might be replicating a little bit, or we're doing this. How do you feel about this? And I'm always open to that, because I remember a time, it's a bit of a strange one actually, honestly, in my head, when I'm on a high and things are going well and I've got energy, I'm going to collaborate with anyone and everyone. Like, that's just me, right? I'm being Mr. Nice Guy and doing everything. And I remember when I first reached out to one of the bigger organizations years and years ago, and I said, I've got this great idea, I'm going to do this thing, it's called Mr. Perfect, it's going to be barbecues. And they replied back, and it was obviously like one of these generic replies, and even the formatting was wrong on the bit underneath it. And they said, but how about you just raise money for us? And I remember just feeling like shattered for a while, going, what? Why would they, I took it so personally. And then I thought about it, and I was like, look, obviously now with maturity as well, going, it's not feasible for them to help every single person who reaches out for a great idea, and as it is in probably the commercial world as well, when you reach out to someone you want to mentor or whatever. And it's funny because I've seen the same full circle. Like, we've grown a bit of a brand now, and it's 4 or 5 years, and now I get that from other people. So I'm always reminding myself, if I'm having a bad day and I'm a bit short, or I sometimes will go to send that email back and not really think about that implication. And it's just human, like sometimes, and I just go, sorry, I can't help right now, or whatever. But then I go, no, I have to pull myself back and think, hear them out. Like, how can we do something? I have to remind myself, because I think I was in that same position. There's a lot of people wanting to do something, which is incredible. Not everyone has the right resources, skills, etc. But we've definitely moved somewhere. Well, a big leap, actually. I think so. Even the time I've been in Australia, 11 years, it's been massive. Absolutely massive. But someone's commented here, Ash is one of our barbecue hosts in regional Victoria. But now hey boss, hey team, bit of a Be a Man podcast flashback for me tonight. So his story, Ash, he found out about what we do through the podcast that we did with Gus Wall on the Be a Man podcast. So it's really interesting, because that was, God, time flies, probably 2 or 3 years ago now, maybe at least 2 and a bit years ago. So was that your first, and I wanted to ask you about the Be a Man thing, was that your first foray into the podcasting stuff then, or did you do stuff before that? Or?
Well, no, firstly, it's really cool that someone has Mr. Perfect through, because I think, obviously I'd met you not long before that, and I thought it was fantastic, and it was great to be able to give you a platform, I suppose. I think before that, well, that was that was my first as a host. But I'd guested on, been interviewed on a number of podcasts before. But that was the biggest one I'd done, and as a host with or co-host with Gus, obviously, and that was fantastic. And that was that was the first one that we totally focused on manhood, on masculinity. And for those who aren't familiar, Be a Man was. I always thought it should have been a question, which is like, what does it mean to be a man? So we explored masculinity from a whole range, all different perspectives, not just around mental health, but around sexuality and professional lives and find out all sorts of things. And that was a fantastic experience. For those of you that know, working with Gus was a pretty cool experience. He's a larger than life character. So and we played off each other really well. I thought, I guess my professional experience with his radio and speaking experience. So that was wonderful. And as you said, it's time flies. That must have been, I think it was good 2 or 3 years ago now. But I can't remember if there was another question in there. Sorry.
Yeah, so I was going to, I guess my sort of second lead up to that was a lot of what you're having to do now, regardless because of what's going on. But with podcasting and the like, and your audiobook and everything else, how do you? Because they've obviously been success. How do you think? I guess why do you think they connect so well with people or men? Maybe the Be a Man was with men, but the Habits for Happiness. Why do you think podcasting is such a good medium for that?
Well, I think Be a Man, to be perfectly honest, I think having Gus was a huge plus. He had for those who might not know, he'd been on Triple M for, I think, close to a decade or something, with a very sports focus. So it was a very blokey, I think 80% of their audience was males, basically. And that's part, that was why it made such a good combination. He had a very strong interest in this, but he didn't obviously have any professional experience. So I think that connected through Gus, through the audience he already had. Plus, we were lucky enough to have Southern Cross Stereo, who owned Triple M, a big engine behind it, who did a fantastic job of promoting and pushing it out. So that was pretty much there was a very strong marketing and advertising push behind it, I suppose. And I think it also connected because again, I think we had a really great balance of his, I think Gus is the everyman. He's the common Aussie. He's a great Aussie bloke. And I think, I'm a qualified expert, but hopefully someone that can also communicate to the average person. So, and we had some great guests on, including this great guy called Mr. Perfect. So, we had a lot of
petrified. I was absolutely petrified, but anyway.
But yeah, so there were a lot of pluses there and a lot of obvious ones. In terms of For Habits for Happiness, which is an audiobook which came out at the end of last year, to be honest, I'm not sure. It's done incredibly well. It's even 4 or 5 months later, it's still the #1 in its category. It's getting fantastic ratings. It's had over several 100,000 downloads, I think. And I'm not really sure, because in some ways it's not that different to a lot of the other work I've done, which is done okay, but not as well as that. I think there was, would have got a great push from Audible. I mean, they did a really good job of marketing as well. Maybe there was just a bit of luck of the timing. It came out late December, actually, which I thought was a strange time, but they were quite positive, and they turned out to be right. That's a time when people are going on summer holidays, downloading books, got time on their hands, sitting on the beach listening. I mean, podcasting and audiobooks generally is a massively growing area. Print publishing sort of, it's not dying; it's still doing okay, but it's a lot harder now. A lot more people are. The podcast and audiobook industry is massively growing. So I don't know. I think I'd like to think that my content had something to do with it, but I think maybe there was a bit of luck as well. Who knows? I'm not quite sure, to be honest.
Yeah, and the reason I asked about that, because I just saw the update when it was. I think I saw on a social channel saying it was still at #1. I thought it was incredible, and I haven't listened to it yet, and I'm going to now. And I think there you go. I had to be honest and say I hadn't, but I think the generally the podcasts I find are great for me to take things in. And if someone's telling me something in the moment, normally my wife, or telling me something that's direct, it just won't, I don't know, it takes me a while to sit on it. And sometimes it might be going in very gradually over a course of time. So listening to podcasts, series about men's health, about mental health, about, all the things that you talk about as well, they just seem to work. And I had an anecdote from that when I was on a bloke psychology podcast a couple of weeks ago by Carl Nelms. He released the first one and I was on it, and he said he got 2 mates like straight afterwards that he'd never really discussed, directly about their mental health. He's a psychologist, and they both said, wow, this made me think I need to go and, sort of access some help, or at least start looking at some help. So I thought that just generally there seems to be a reason that podcasts work, and I don't know the science behind it or what goes in from the podcast, but they're great for me as well. I love them.
Well, I think I'm actually a reader. I love reading. That's one of my main interests and, I guess, hobbies in life, I suppose. But that's the rarity, really. There's a lot of people once they finish school, once they finish university, don't read that much, and that's fine. It's not good or bad. It's just the way it is. So, but there's a much bigger group of people who, for a variety of reasons, find it easier to listen. And so a lot of us listen to music. But particularly when there's a lot of people who have spent at least 1 or 2 hours commuting to and from work. Well, maybe not at the moment, but under normal circumstances. It's not unusual, particularly in a big city like Sydney, for people to spend 2 hours traveling to and from work every day. Now, what do you do for those 2 hours? Well, listening to something's an easy thing to do. It's relatively passive. You can still stare out the window. And so that's one of the reasons why I think, and that's what, most people, a large proportion of those people that listen to podcasts and audiobooks do it traveling to and from work. So it's easy to do, and it's relatively cheap. It's convenient. Almost all of us these days have some device like this, so you can easily download hundreds of books if you want, or podcasts. All the podcasts I listen to are free. So it's fantastic, and I've certainly listened to more and more podcasts in the last few years, and almost every day I'll listen to a bit of a podcast. To be honest.
Yeah, my wife has a go at me because I'll go to the lounge and do the washing up and have my earphones in. I'll be cleaning, I'll be doing the vacuuming, I'll be going outside to put the bins out. It's just a habit now to put it in, even when I go to sleep, and that's been a bad one. I had to stop doing that. But on the habits for happiness, Gordon, who's the chair of Mr. Perfect, great friend as well, and he's an avid sort of learner, I guess, and I'm sure he'll be picking it up and listening to it. He just mentioned there, what are some of the key habits? So without spending the whole time reading the book, give us sort of a highlight of the key habits you mentioned, I guess, in the audiobook.
Well, I say just for those of you interested, if you are an Audible subscriber or whatever, it's actually free, which is I love being able to plug something and not having to necessarily sell it. So I guess the key habits are, it's not radically new, they're common things, but I think, and going back to the point earlier about what do I have maybe that connects or that allows people to connect to me, I think what I've learned over the years is, I think probably one of my greatest strengths as a professional is to be able to take science and take evidence-based practices and communicate them in a way that's easy to understand. And so that's, if Habits for Happiness has been successful, I think that's partly why, because it's very easy to understand. It's very applicable, very applied, very practical strategies. So the main ones are things like, well, starting off with a positive vision. I think that's setting goals and having a vision board and imagining. It's hard to live a good life if you don't even know what that life looks like.
Yes.
And many of us don't. Many of us sort of wander through, thinking, what the hell am I doing? I'll just do tomorrow. I'll just get the next day done. But those people that are really happy and successful more generally have a longer term vision and a positive vision of what a great life would look like. So that's that's habit one. That's the first thing. And then from there, we break it down into shorter term goals, obviously, and developing more practical short term strategies. It's about having fun. I think that's frequently underestimated and undervalued. It's about taking care of our physical health and well-being. That's one of the other habits, which is obviously good. You just touched on sleep. Sleep's a very important part of health and well-being. Diet and nutrition is a really important part, and exercise is a really important part. And we all know that exercise is good for our bodies, for our muscles, but it's also very good for our mental health. In fact, for me, that's one of my most important mental health strategies is exercising regularly. It's about developing and maintaining good quality relationships. And so talking about the connection hour, connecting is, I would say, probably the most important health and well-being, mental health strategy out of everything. If I had to, if you were to ask me, what's the most important thing for happiness, for health, for well-being, for longevity, for success in life, I'd probably say, well, I'm loath to name just one because there's not just one, there's lots of things. But if I had to, I would probably say the quality of our relationships, our connectedness, our sense of belonging. And, that's why I'm super, such a big fan of Mr. Perfect and the barbecues, because that's a great example. It's a great, simple way for people to connect. There's lots of other ways we can do it, but that's one of the important habits. It doesn't mean you have to be extroverted. It doesn't mean you've got to have thousands of friends, but it does mean in some way or other, we need to have at least a couple. You don't need that many, but at least a couple, even just one or two, of people who you can trust, who you feel comfortable with, who you can talk to. It might be your husband or your wife, your boyfriend or your girlfriend, could be your mum or your dad or your best mate or whatever. But we probably do need at least one or two of them, maybe a few more if you're lucky. But in some way or other, that connection is vitally important. And then there's other things. I talk about mindfulness, I talk about optimism and hope, which are very important, obviously. I talk about getting better at identifying our strengths as opposed to just trying to fix all our weaknesses. This is a really important part of positive psychology. As a clinical psychologist, all I learned to do is help people identify their faults and weaknesses, really, and then help them fix it. Now that's okay. We all have faults and weaknesses, and if we can identify them and fix them, then great. But one of the things I loved most about positive psychology when I first discovered it, and I still love, is that just like we all have faults and failings and weaknesses, which we do because we're all imperfect, we also have strengths, positive attributes. And the more we can identify them, the better we can use them in all aspects of our life, the happier and more successful we'll be. So that's, I think that's most of them. I can't remember.
Yeah, such a good summary. Again, I was lost in it. I had some questions and I was thinking that everything you were saying, there was just the key themes or the high level topics of them are, we sound like a broken record sometimes, but we've covered a few of those in the past on TRH, having, fitness, exercise, and not seeing it as, when people think of working out or exercise or fitness, they just assume immediately they have to be an athlete. And that's where your mind goes. Even mine, like, it stops me sometimes. I go, well, I'm getting older now. I don't get out as much. I don't do this. And I've realized that let's not aim too high, and let's start with sort of the smaller points. But the other points you made about, I know when I was, a lot of the things I come up with my psychologist was, well, you have this idea of what you think a perfect life is. You think you're aiming for something all the time and you're focusing on the bits that are not so great. He said, so what does that actual life look like then? And I hadn't really, I actually had not considered it. And he said, well, how do you know, how can you measure it subjectively, or how can you purely say, well, how can you judge that or judge yourself and be hard on yourself if you don't know what it looks like? I'm stumped. I sat there and went, yeah. And then I tried to come up with some random stuff that was just coming to my head. And he went, that's not what you'll really want though, is it? And I went, no, actually it's not. So, yeah.
It's bizarre that it really is bizarre. It's absurd that we're not taught this at school, really. Well, I mean, we're starting to, which is great. It's better than it used to be. But if you think about, I guess, like, I love sport and it's great to talk about sport, particularly in a male sort of context. But, if you think about sport, they know exactly what a win is. You know exactly what a victory looks like. You score more points than the opposition. I mean, it depends what game you're playing, obviously. And then they'll even break it down. They'll know what a win is. They'll know, they'll have, defensive targets and offensive targets, etc., whatever it might be. Similarly within an organization, most organizations know what success looks like. Now, it might be something as simple as making a profit or a certain amount of profit, but there'll be other subtleties or, things along the way as well. But many of us don't do that in our personal lives. What's a win? What's success? What does profit mean, in a sense, in your personal life? If you can't answer that, it's virtually impossible to achieve. And that's, so that's really the first starting point. What does a great life look like? And then you can work back from there and work out what you need to do, where you might need to get help, what you might need to learn. And we can, if we start doing those things, we can hopefully get closer to it.
No, I love that. It just rings home, like every point you said then, and the whole point of I think you mentioned vision board or a mood board or something, that it sounds, to people that might sound a bit strange at first, but that's exactly it. Like if you don't know where it is, or you can't break it down to daily saying, like my psychologist tells me, in the morning, you've got 2 young kids, it's hectic, you've changed their nappy or one of the boys' nappies, you've got them ready for school, like give yourself a tick for like those things. Those little things in a day, I mean, you haven't lost it at them before you've got them in the car to go to kindy, you've got them to kindy safely, and you start building up these things. And it's only recently I really appreciate that and gone, oh wow, actually that was a pretty good day. If you actually looked at like a scoreboard and went, well, yeah, the one little thing that used to happen might knock me off that, that perch, and I'll just focus on that for the whole day, week, whatever it might be. So it's just given a totally different perspective. And I think you also mentioned we're not kind of told that. There's some huge educational gaps on those things that we, I think, generally are not told or taught. But we as men just don't even consider, don't even think, we all know where to start. But keeping it simple has been a big theme of, I think, these TRHs we've been doing as well. And yeah, I love that. I can't wait to listen in more depth. But I think you covered that when you were talking the second time back, you covered so many great points in the summary of Habits for Happiness. But it might be one of those that you leave us with. I think you said the most important, but what would be, I guess, your final bit of advice for connection, or the most important thing you'd leave, I guess, mainly men with on how to connect or how to find it?
I suppose it sort of comes from what I think was probably my biggest mistake, particularly when I was younger and a bit less so now. And I think it's a mistake that a lot of us men particularly make, and that's that to really I'll start with, I think probably the most important thing, if I had to name one thing, would be it's about connecting and finding good quality relationships, whoever or wherever that might be. In order to do that, and this is again what a lot of us men find difficult, I think, to really connect with someone else, you need to be vulnerable. Yeah. You need to be Mr. Not Perfect. Yeah. Because without that, and I guess that's, I've sort of wondered over the years why, well, I think I've wished in a way that I was closer to certain people, and wondered why I wasn't. And to be perfectly honest, the fault was predominantly mine, because how could I expect to get close to someone when I was never really honest with them? I was never really my true self. And I've only started to really do that in recent years. Now that might scare some people away. Some people not be able to deal with it, but then they're not meant to be my true friends for whatever reason. But I would say that we really need to value connection. We really need to value friendships. And in order to do that, we've got to be prepared to be vulnerable. We've got to be prepared to be imperfect, to open up, to admit some of our faults and failings. And when it's quite a great, good feeling when you get used to doing it. Once you don't have to carry this weight around anymore. And the reality is, most people won't judge you as badly as you think they will. I was scared for many years that people would think horribly of me, and it turns out they didn't. Nothing terrible happened when I came out. Some people didn't know how to deal with it, but that's okay. Some people, responded better than others, but those that didn't, I didn't blame them. That wasn't necessarily their fault. It did surprise me a bit how different people responded, but anyway, I'm getting off track. I think that the key message I'd say is, I think to really connect with others, we've got to know who we are, be prepared to admit who we are, and be who we are in public. And I suppose that's that's been the focus of my life in a sense for the last 5, 6, 7 years. I suppose trying to be more comfortable with and be more vulnerable and authentic. And it's if there are any disadvantages, the advantages far outweigh them, I would say.
Absolutely. No, I don't think I can add anything to that, and I won't. It's been absolutely fascinating. Made me think about a lot. We had a ton of comments. I'm sure there'll be many more views as well, and questions afterwards. So I probably will ask you back on at some stage. I'll give you a breather, but I'm sure people will want to know more. So look, I urge people obviously to check out Habits for Happiness, and where can people find out more about you and the work you do? What's the sort of central hub or the easiest way?
Thanks, Terry. And I'd love to come back anytime. You know, or I hope you know, I'm a big fan of Mr. Perfect. I think it's fantastic, and good on all of you, whoever's out there, for being a part of what's a fantastic community. And I actually just I wanted to say this earlier. Sure. I actually went through, Terry knows this, and earlier this year I went through a very, very, very bad patch, a very difficult patch. I won't go into the details, and I was on the Mr. Perfect community, and sort of reached out and asked for help in a sense, and the responses I got were it was just fantastic. I'd almost say it saved my life. It certainly helped me get through a very, very dark period just a few months ago. And it was just a couple of other blokes saying, "It's okay, mate. We're here for you. We've been through that as well." So I just want to say a big thank you to you, to all the community. It's fantastic what you're doing. If anyone gets in touch, my website is www.drhappy, drhappy.com.au. But that'll take you to, on Facebook, the Happiness Institute. On Instagram, I'm the Happiness Institute, and on Twitter, I'm Dr. Happy. So come and say hello. If you've got any other questions, fire away. Happy to ask them. I try to answer them as best I can.
Amazing. No, as I said, fascinating. Thank you so much, Tim, and thank you everyone for tuning in. I will reshare this as well tomorrow morning as well for anyone that missed it. Take care, Tim, and take care of everyone else out there.
Thanks, mate. Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. Cheers.